May I invite to chair and judge this free paper presentation by Dr. Santanu Mandal, Dr. Ilan Kumar Pasupathy, Dr. Santosh Gopi Krishna Gadde, Dr. Chekitan Singh, and Dr. Amitabh Kumar. Welcome, doctors. A very good morning. And we'll be giving 4 minutes to each participant. There'll be a 2-minute of question and answer session. And let's try to make it in time. For the first presentation, may I invite Dr. Aniket Rai. Do we have you here, Dr. Aniket? I cannot see him in the participants. I'm going to move forward with the second presenter, which is Dr. Rupa Epil. Do we have you here, ma'am?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, faculties. Good morning, delegates.
You can start your screen sharing and we'll also start the timer for 4 minutes.
Is my screen visible?
Not yet.
No, not yet.
I'll try again.
Yes, it's visible now. You can start your presentation.
Make it full screen and go ahead.
Yeah, go to slideshow, please.
Is it fine, sir?
Full screen, madam.
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Rupa and I'll be presenting on the topic assessment of the central macular thickness in patients with unilateral acute anterior uveitis. Acute anterior uveitis is the most common form of uveitis. Most common form of uveitis and may occur as an isolated problem due to idiopathic reason or may arise in illness or inflammation elsewhere in the body. AAU primarily affects the front of the uvea and anterior chamber in acute diseases, and this acute disease is characterized by sudden onset. Symptoms include pain, redness, photophobia that typically develop rapidly over a few days. Inflammation in the anterior segment of the eye can lead to posterior segment changes like increase in the central macular thickness, RNFL thickness, and cystoid macular edema sometimes. Changes in the posterior segment can be easily missed out in only using slit lamp biomicroscopy. Hence, optical coherence tomography can be useful to detect findings in the acute phase of AAU. OCT being a non-invasive tool for retinal imaging helps us to accurately measure the thickness of the macula and retinal nerve layer thickness. In the study, to determine the effect of AAU in the posterior segment, macular thickness was compared between existing controls using OCT.
Can you mute the others in the background?
You go ahead with your presentation.
This was a prospective observational study performed in a tertiary care center in Jharkhand from August 20 to December 2020. 25 patients of diagnosed unilateral AAU were in the group A and group B had the 24 healthy aged matched controls were enrolled. Diagnosis was made after detailed ophthalmic examination, including best corrected visual acuity, IOP measurement via applanation tonometry or non-contact tonometry, slit lamp biomicroscopy, endoscopy, and OCT was done. And diagnosis of AAU was made according to the clinical symptoms along with the presence of inflammatory cells in the anterior chamber, and which was graded from 0 to 4 in accordance with the Sun nomenclature. And the patients aged less than 18 years, posterior uveitis, panuveitis, pre-existing ophthalmic diseases that affect the retinal thickness, past planitis, diabetic macular edema, IOP more than 21 mmHg, and history of intraocular surgery except cataract were within the exclusion criteria. Thickness of the macula was compared in the initial active phase and inactive phase, and at least 3 months after resolution of the inflammation were analyzed. OCT measurements was done in the macular cube 512 into 128 cube based on the central macular thickness. The macular cubes can divide into central circle, inner ring, outer ring, using 1 mm, 3 mm, and 6 mm respectively, using retinal mass analysis system. Now the results, in the group A, there were 25 patients, and as I told, and group B, 24 patients. The mean age was 37 and 35 respectively. Best corrected vision logMAR 0.04 and minus 0.6 in the group B. Inflammation grade was 1.7, and central macular thickness in the active phase in the affected eyes were 260.5 plus minus 25 micron meters, and in control eyes were 250.4 plus minus 17.5 micron meters. And the average CMT in the active phase in the affected eye was 260.5 plus minus 25 micron meters, and in inactive phase 251 plus minus 15.6 micron meters. The difference between the two was significant. P-value was 0.04, which is less than 0.05. And
Dr. Rupa, please conclude.
Okay, this is one of the pictures where the comparison between the macular thickness is done before and after 3 months. So previous studies have shown that macular thickness is significantly greater than normal in uveitic eyes in acute inflammation and active inflammation, and my study also favors the same. So to conclude, OCT scan shows the central macular thickness of affected eyes increase in the active phase, and it gradually decreased when inflammation subsided. So we can use OCT routinely as a prognostic tool and for monitoring in acute cases of anterior uveitis. Thank you, everyone.
Any questions for Dr. Rupa, since we're running out of time?
Dr. Rupa, did you compare it with the other eyes, or these are just the normal individuals, right?
Yes, sir. Normal individuals. Yes, sir. I took the controls for the for normal individuals, not the fellow eye, since there may be association with systemic diseases. It may occur bilaterally, so that I compared with the control eyes.
Another interesting presentation. One comment that OCT, when you measure it, even if you measure the same patient twice, there can be some variation in the measurement in OCT. 10% is considered cutoff. So this thing is within 10 microns only. So there can be, inter-observer variability and where you put the scan, in terms of measurement. So it would have been much better if you would have compared the other eye,
Yes, sir. Fellow eye, yes, sir.
Yeah. Otherwise, interesting concept. Definitely.
Thank you.
Anybody else for questions, please?
We still have 25 seconds.
One last question, Dr. Rupa. Did you see any changes in individual retinal layers?
Sir,
when you were studying the OCT morphology?
Sir, in one patient, there was macular edema developing. Other than that, individual layer, I think ganglion cell layer, or that you're asking about.
How was the uveitis?
Yes.
Did you give NSAIDs also, or only steroids?
That's steroids. Yes.
No NSAIDs.
No, sir. Steroid based.
Interesting thing to see in the future. If you add NSAIDs, do they give any further advantage?
Advantage. Okay, sir. Thank you. I'll keep that in mind, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Doctor. We will move ahead with our next speaker, Dr. Yusra Asad. She's already started sharing the screen, so I won't be long. Let's go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Yusra Asad. My presentation was scheduled for later, but I will be presenting now. I hope it's been noted.
Yes.
So I'll be presenting on the topic of intravitreal clindamycin as first-line therapy in proxoplasmic retinochoroiditis. Ocular toxoplasmosis is the most common cause of posterior uveitis in immunocompetent patients. Although more commonly self-limiting, optic nerve or macular involvement or severe vitritis may affect vision and thus calls for prompt treatment to maintain vision. It is conventionally treated with systemic medications like triple therapy with sulfadiazine, pyrimethamine, and folinic acid, clindamycin, trimethoprim, sulfamethoxazole, double strength, azithromycin, and tovacone. However, in our case series, we have used intravitreal clindamycin as the first-line therapy for treatment of retinochoroidal toxoplasmosis. The diagnosis of these patients was based on the clinical findings as well as antibody titers of IgG, both IgG and IgM of Toxoplasma gondii. This is our first case. We had a 40-year-old female who presented to us with 2+ vitreous cells, active juxtamacular retinitis, a best corrected vision of only finger counting to 1 meter in the right eye, but a normal best corrected vision in her left eye. On OCT, we found a whole lot of macular edema with some hyperreflective spots in the vitreous and disorganizations of the layer just underlying the lesion. She was treated with 2 intravitreal injections of intravitreal clindamycin, 1 mg in 0.1 ml, 1 week apart, and was started on systemic steroids, tapering dose of 1 mg per kg per day over 6 weeks. 2 months later, her lesion had become sequescent. Her OCT had gone to near normal with no macular edema seen. Our next patient was a 52-year-old female. She also presented to us with 3+ vitreous cells and a focal juxtamacular chorioretinitis. And her best corrected vision at presentation was only finger counting at ½ meter. Her left eye was absolutely normal. As you can see, this lesion here and macular edema, subretinal fluid, as well as intraretinal fluid on OCT. She was again treated with 2 injections of intravitreal clindamycin given 1 week apart, along with systemic steroids. And 2 months later, she had a quiescent lesion with some amount of outer retinal and choroidal atrophy on OCT, and her best corrected vision had improved to 6/12. Yet another case of a 12-year-old male with a small juxtamacular lesion and very little subretinal fluid and macular edema. He was also treated with the same treatment, and his vision improved from 6/18 to 6/6 within 1 month of giving the 2 intravitreal clindamycin injections. The vitritis had resolved and macular edema as well. Another case, 22-year-old male, he had a small juxtapapillary retinitis lesion just inferonasal to the disc with the best corrected vision of 6/9. We also treated him with intravitreal clindamycin, 2 injections given 1 week apart along with systemic steroids. And 1 month later, his vision had improved to 6/6 and his lesion had become quiescent. Just like our case series, we have a lot of studies in literature which support the use of clindamycin in cases of where systemic therapy is either not tolerated or allergic. However, as opposed to that, we propose its use as first-line therapy. The question arises as to why and where. Why? Because intravitreals act at the exact direct site of action. They provide a high concentration in the vitreous cavity. There are no systemic side effects and no reported retinal toxicity in all of the case series that we have seen. However, and the question to where, we can give it to patients who are either allergic, intolerant, or have shown worsening or improvement or no improvement despite systemic medications. And also we have an issue of non-availability of pyrimethamine these days. So apart from this, we would like to conclude that we can consider clindamycin as first-line strategy for toxoplasmic retinochoroides for a multitude of reasons, such as that it is safe, effective, with easy availability, better patient compliance, and improved systemic safety profile, target site enhanced availability, lesser follow-up, and of course, it is a better choice of treatment for pregnant as well as pediatric patients where these systemic medications may not be tolerable. However, in spite of all of this, we believe that further prospective clinical studies are needed to validate its efficacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yusra. Any questions, sir?
Yeah, nice presentation, Dr. Yusra. I wanted to just understand your first case. I could not see any choroidal involvement. It was purely retinal in the OCT. If you go to the OCT, and the lesion was not also very classical of a toxoplasma thing, and there was hardly any vitritis. So was it IgG, IgM positive?
Yes, sir. So we got titers done because the first case to us was also a little confusing. It was a little atypical when it comes to toxoplasmic retinochoroiditis. We did a whole set of investigations and the IgG titers came positive for toxoplasma gondii.
IgM too? Because
yes,
G can
sir,
be still positive, you know.
Yes,
and,
IgM were also positive. Yes.
Your second case also didn't have much vitritis. Actually, what is classically seen in toxoplasmosis is a good amount of vitritis. So that is again, that was missing.
Although, sir, at presentation, she did have vitritis, maybe the pictures.
Right.
Yes,
why didn't you try to combine DEXA along with Clinda? Why only Clinda and systemic steroids?
So, sir, we believe there are different studies and this is debatable. So, dexamethasone, when given intravitreally, one, it has a short mean life and it may interfere with the action of clindamycin intravitreally. So, giving it systemically would, one, give a better mean duration of action, plus it would let the clindamycin act directly on the target site alone. There are also cases seen of recurrence when giving intravitreal steroids in toxoplasmosis. We had no recurrence at up to 2 years of follow-up in any of our cases.
Thank you. Anybody else?
So it was a recurrence what you had seen in other studies. Is it similar studies wherein?
Sorry, sir, I can't hear you.
I mean, that was the difference between those studies and yours?
Sorry, sir, I'm sorry.
Yeah, what I was asking is, since you have used only clindamycin,
yes,
since
sir.
other studies used both Clinda and DEXA together, so
yes,
is it only the recurrence that was a difference, or how faster was a resolution in the other studies?
So in other studies, injections have been given to up to 4 injections, weekly intervals, 4 weeks. We have only given 2 injections. Most of our patients responded very well to just 2 injections, so we continued that. Along with that, there are studies with both recurrence as well as non-recurrence, but the main difference is most of those studies have taken up patients which are either allergic or not responsive or intolerable to systemic medications, whereas we have taken this therapy as a first-line therapy in such patients. It's a small case series, so as yet we have not seen any recurrences. We will continue to give this treatment and see if there are any. Yes, sir.
Right. Have you been following it up with
Sorry, sir. Again, I could not hear.
The next time. Yeah. Did you follow them up with IgG and IgM?
Yes, sir. The IgM titers had reduced. The IgG were still a little raised, but we did not get a very long IgG titers done because of affordability.
Sorry, sir. The time is up. Thank you so much, Dr. Yusra, for your participation. We will now move forward to our next speaker, Dr. Priyanka Somasundaram, but I cannot see her in the participants list. Hence, I'll move with another one. Dr. Shruti Satpathy, do we have you here? Okay. We'll start with Dr. Shruti.
Start my share screen.
Yes,
Can I start? Shall I start?
Yes, you can start.
A warm good morning to respected judges and all the viewers. Today, my topic of presentation is subconjunctive hemorrhage and acute anterior uveitis, an isolated ocular manifestation of Kawasaki disease. Coming to introduction, Kawasaki disease is a systemic small and medium vessel vasculitis, particularly affecting the coronary arteries. Burns et al. Found evidence of anterior uveitis in 83% of children who diagnosed with Kawasaki disease in the first week of their illness. Uveitis is not only the not the only clue to diagnose Kawasaki disease, but if a patient has fever and conjunctivitis, ophthalmic examination is very helpful in detecting uveitis, and it should be considered a sign of Kawasaki disease. Coming to the particulars of the index case, My patient was 8-year-old male student from Cuttack, Odisha, came with the chief complaints of fever for 3 days and redness and pains in the left eye for 2 days. Then case details, the patient had fever for 3 days, which was high grade and intermittent, along with rashes for 3 days, which was macropapillary overtrum, and reddish. There was reddish discoloration of lips with pain and redness in the left eye, which was along with foreign body sensation and water discharge with flaring of vision for 2 days. Coming to the detailed ocular examination, the positive findings were water discharge in the left eyelid. Vision was it was normal in the right eye and 6.9 partial in the left eye, which was not improving with the glasses in the left eye. And in the for near vision, it was an 6 in all the in both the eyes. Intraocular pressure was 12.2 millimeter of mercury in the right eye. In the left eye, it was 14.6. LPI was patent on both the sides. On fundoscopy, it was within normal limits in the right eye, and it was the media was slightly hazy in the left eye. On slit lamp examination, I found out in the left eye there was conjunctival congestion and circumciliary congestion, along with subconjunctival hemorrhage present involving upper nasal and temporal bulbar conjunctiva. The transparency was not maintained in the left eye, showing mild haze due to presence of fresh fine capillus lining endothelium, and there was aqueous flare in the left eye with of grade 1, and cells was present. These were the pics showing subconjunctival hemorrhage in the left eye, along with mucopurulent discharge, and yes, sir. This is the SCH, and on slit lamp examination, there were fresh fine capillus lining endothelium. So my provisional diagnosis was acute non-granulomatous anterior uveitis in the left eye, along with hemorrhagic conjunctivitis. And on investigation, ESR and CRP was raised. So so my final diagnosis was Kawasaki disease along with left eye with acute non-granulomatous anterior uveitis. I managed with eye drop humatropin 2 times per day for 7 days, and prednisolone acetate on tapering in a tapering way, and the eye drop carboxymethyl cellulose for 4 times a day. Systemic management was given by the pediatrician. IVIG 30 gram IV stat in single dose over 12 hours, and acetyl salicylic acid 400 milligrams 6 hourly. Anterior uveitis. So coming to the discussion, anterior uveitis is common in Kawasaki disease. It is necessary to investigate other causes of anterior uveitis also, like infection, HLA-B27, and echocardiography. In KD, uveitis resolves within 2 to 8 weeks after disease without any sequel. Kawasaki disease patients have anterior uveitis need to follow up on its severity between 1 to 7 days. Uveitis in Kawasaki disease shows a mild clinical course. In most cases, topical corticosteroid is effective. Coming to the conclusion, it is the uveitis is an important clue to diagnose incomplete Kawasaki disease. Early diagnosis of Kawasaki disease is needed to prevent coronary artery complications, and routine slit lamp examination will be helpful for early diagnosis of KD in patients with conjunctival injection. Thank you.
Questions for Dr. Shruti?
Was a cardiac workup done, Dr. Shruti?
Yes,
cardiac
sir.
workup?
Sir,
cardiac workup was done in this patient?
No, sir. Sir, actually, we referred the patient to the cardiology department, and there they had done all the echocardiography, ECG.
Okay. Was anything diagnosed from cardiac point of view?
No, sir. It was there were no positive findings in cardiac cardiac investigations.
Then what DDs would you consider in such a situation? What are the differential diagnosis?
Sir, differential diagnosis was like infections. Usually in this age group, there can be HLA-B27 positive diseases like juvenile idiopathic arthritis and others, mainly infectious, sir, and HLA-B27 positive diseases.
Okay. Was it worked out in that way? I mean, did you show it to an immunologist or rheumatologist?
No, sir. Sir, actually,
though it was the initial episode, yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Patient was already, sir. Actually, the patient was already diagnosed as Kawasaki disease, so we did not put him on extra investigations.
Okay. Good.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shruti, for your participation. I will go ahead with the next speaker, but I cannot see Dr. Dakshini as well as Dr. Amrita Day in the participants list. So Dr. Sumedha, you will be next.
The speaker is also here, Dr. Aniket.
Ma'am, should I present?
Yes, Dr. Sumedha, we can go ahead.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I will be presenting anterior uveitis in HIV, playing Sherlock Holmes.
Share your screen, ma'am.
Just a minute, sir. Is my screen visible now, sir?
Yes. Now make it full screen and go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I will be presenting anterior uveitis in HIV, playing Sherlock Holmes. There are no financial disclosures to declare, and there are no conflicts of interest. The aim is to highlight the possibilities that should be thought of while managing anterior uveitis in HIV, and to bring out rifabutin as an important cause of anterior uveitis with hypopyon in patients of HIV who are on prophylaxis, rifabutin prophylaxis for Mycobacterium avium complex. Also, to emphasize the importance of review of medical and treatment records while evaluating anterior uveitis in HIV. So we had 3 patients of HIV who presented to us with anterior uveitis. All 3 had photophobia, ocular pain, watering, and diminution of vision. They underwent a thorough ocular and systemic evaluation, and a battery of blood investigations were done in all 3 of them. On detailed review of the medical records, the 2 of the patients out of the 3, the first 2 cases had a recent increase in the CD4 count, and all the 3 patients were on tablet rifabutin 300 mg prophylaxis for Mycobacterium avium complex infection. Since the first 2 patients had a recent increase in the CD4 count, we were under the impression that the patients had immune recovery uveitis. We started the patients on ocular steroids and cycloplegic, ocular steroids in the form of eye drop pred acetate 6 times a day and cycloplegic atropine 3 times a day. Later on, rifabutin was discontinued after the physician's consent. These were the investigations that all the 3 patients had undergone. This is the clinical picture of patient 1, 2, and 3. So in case 1, both the eyes were eventually involved in all the 3 patients, but the involvement was asymmetric. I could not include all the pictures because of the time constraints. There was exudative uveitis in all the 3 patients. In case 1, the hypopyon was 0.5 millimeters. In case 2, about 1 millimeter hypopyon. And in case 3, also the hypopyon was 1 millimeter. There was pupillary membrane also seen in case 2 and 3. There were, of course, there was flare cells in the anterior chamber also. Coming to the discussion and results, anterior uveitis could be due to infections. It could be because of immune recovery uveitis, drug-induced uveitis, or an endogenous ophthalmitis may also give a picture of anterior uveitis. Uveitis due to increased immunocompetency in HIV is termed as immune recovery uveitis. Rifabutin-associated ocular inflammation may be seen in patients of HIV. All the patients were on HART and rifabutin, and all had anterior uveitis. So we observed a moderate improvement, which was not really satisfactory after starting ocular steroids and cycloplegics. However, the patients had mild symptomatic relief, but all the 3 patients showed significant improvement of signs and symptoms following discontinuation of rifabutin. Initially, for the first 2 patients, it was difficult to rule out IRU as they had associated improvement of the CD4 count. So to conclude, a high index of suspicion should be kept while managing anterior uveitis in HIV towards both IRU and rifabutin-induced uveitis. And in HIV patients on Mycobacterium avium complex prophylaxis, rifabutin is a rare but a very important cause of exudative anterior uveitis. These are a few of my references. With this, I would like to conclude. Thank you.
Question, Dr. Sumedha.
Yeah, nice talk, Dr. Sumedha.
Thank you, sir.
I just wanted to know what were the fundus findings and other things, you know, anything in your record?
I will tell you, sir. In the first patient, the one with 0.5 millimeter hypopyon, we caught it quite earlier. We started the treatment quite earlier. There were not many fundus findings, sir. In patient 2 and 3 with the pupillary membrane, there was spillover uveitis in the posterior segment also seen. However, there was no retinal involvement or cystoid macular edema.
Okay.
I have one question. Have you done HLA-B27 in these cases?
All the cases HLA-B27 was done.
Okay, thank you.
And I mean, can you completely, how common is this rifabutin-induced anterior uveitis? What is the incidence in literature?
So the incidence in literature for rifabutin-induced uveitis is not much. They say that 0.5% of the patients present with rifabutin-induced uveitis, that too with high doses of rifabutin, that is about 1200 milligram of rifabutin for the treatment of Mycobacterium avium complex and not prophylaxis. It is very commonly seen in cidofovir. About 50% of the patients with cidofovir present with anterior uveitis.
Okay, then how do you differentiate whether the improvement post-treatment was due to stopping rifabutin or putting steroids, and because there is no comparison that way, it's just
like I said, yeah, it is a case series of 3 cases. Initially, it was a diagnostic conundrum. We were under a dilemma. The patients could be having immune recovery uveitis. We did start them on steroids and cycloplegic. Initially, we did not think of a rifabutin-induced induced uveitis. Unless we probed the medical records, we saw the treatment history, and we did not have a satisfactory improvement to the steroids and cycloplegics. So we decided to discontinue rifabutin. Initially, we did not even think of it because rifabutin was started in 300 milligram dose, which is too small to cause a uveitis. However, after discontinuation in all the 3 patients, there was a dramatic improvement.
All right, but it would be a good beginning to a much larger study, you know, with much larger numbers, so that you can attach a significance value to
I
it.
agree, sir.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sumedha, for your participation.
Thank you, ma'am.
We have Dr. Sabyasachi Bandyopadhyay and Dr. Dinesh Suhan, but I cannot see them in the participants list. So we'll move forward with Dr. Parth Mehta's free paper.
Good morning to the esteemed judges and all the attendees. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Yes. Yes. I would like to thank AIOS at the outset for giving us an opportunity to present our work. I am Dr. Parth, the final resident at Shankar Nethralaya, and I'll be presenting a case of measles retinopathy, which was a diagnostic and a therapeutic dilemma for us. While retinitis is an important site-threatening infectious disease of the retina, commonly implicated organisms include the herpes group of viruses. It can occur both in immunocompromised as well as immunocompetent patients. We report an unusual case of bilaterally rapidly progressing measles retinopathy in a vaccinated 14-year-old girl. The girl presented to us with the visual acuity of counting fingers 1 meter and less than N36 in the left eye and 6 by 6 N6 in the right eye. The color fundus photo of the right eye shows normal posterior pole, Left eye shows area of retinitis involving the fovea temporally with satellite lesions along the inferior temporal arcade. Suspecting viral retinitis, an AC tap was done for herpes, CMV, and varicella, which eventually came out to be negative. And because macula was involved, she was given intravitreal foscarnet injection. IV methylprednisolone 500 mg 3 doses and tablet acyclovir was started. Following treatment, lesions in the left eye improved and visual acuity improved up to 636. She presented to us 3 weeks later with diminution of vision in the right eye, in spite of being on oral steroids and acyclovir, with a similar patch of retinitis seen along the inferior temporal arcade, sparing the fovea this time in the right eye, which showed leakage of dye on fundus fluorescein angiography. The left eye showed healing by scarring. Serology for HIV, hepatitis B and C, and syphilis and toxoplasma was negative. AC tap was done for the right eye for viruses, which was negative. The right eye vision rapidly deteriorated to 1/60 and less than N36 with disc edema, along with rapidly progressing areas of necrotizing retinitis. Vision in the left eye remained stable. She presented to us 4 weeks later with vision dropping to PL positive, PR inaccurate, but dense vitritis, along with hazy retinal view. USD B scan showed an inferior localized shallow retinal detachment. SWEPS OCT imaging of the left eye showed foveal thinning, along with intact retinal pigment epithelium. As retinitis in both eyes was similar at presentation, she was started on IV acyclovir along with oral and topical steroids. She started developing neurological symptoms like sleeplessness. Based on the symptoms, we suspected subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, and antibody titer was done for measles. The serum IgG levels showed levels of more than 300 arbitrary units per ml, whereas the normal value is less than 16 units. History of complete vaccination up to the age was 9 months was given by the parents along with the booster dose. MRI was done to rule out neurological regions, which showed optic neuritis, but without any brain parenchymal lesions. Electroencephalogram was normal. A diagnosis of measles maculopathy with optic neuritis was made. CSF analysis was deferred by the neurologist because of lack of further behavioral symptoms, as well as a normal EEG. Acyclovir was stopped and patient was kept on oral steroids. This is the final fundus photo showing areas of retinal detachment and a moth-eaten appearance of the retina of the left eye with areas of scarring. Measles is a single-stranded RNA virus. Ocular manifestations range from gamut from anterior segment to the posterior segment, but most characteristic is necrotizing retinitis, which usually starts at the macula. SSP is a progressive neurological disorder. It starts with behavioral changes. Ocular involvement occurs in about 50% of the cases and may precede neurological symptoms by several weeks or months. There is no specific treatment for measles retinopathy, but corticosteroids have to be given. In cases of SSP, neurologists advocate giving of inosine pranovex tablet along with intrathecal interferon alpha injection. Similar case reports have shown macular retinitis as an early manifestation of SSP. To conclude, measles is a rare but an important cause of acute retinitis and can lead to blinding retinopathy and fulminant life-threatening condition of SSP. It must be kept as a differential diagnosis in a suspected case of viral retinitis, especially in a young immunocompetent adult, even if vaccination is complete. And prompt referral by an ophthalmologist to a neurologist in time will aid in early targeted therapy and may be life-saving. Thank you for patient listening.
Questions for Dr. Parth?
Very, very nice case. And did you do AC tap? But I think vitreous tap was not done.
No, sir. Vitreous tap was not done. Anti-chamber tap was done, sir.
Right, right. Very interesting. And could we have done anything else, you know, in this particular case?
Sir, we had actually done all the battery of investigations, sir, even the routine blood investigations. Yes, sir.
Retrospectively thinking, now if you have to manage such a case, what would you do differently?
Probably,
Did you get my question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I got the question.
Yes. Now, if you see such a case, how will you do things differently so that you can manage it, you know, without vision loss?
Maybe, sir, get the titers done early, if at all, in case, or start. We already gave the patients an intravitreal foscarnet also, suspecting areas of retinal necrosis in both the eyes. So the right eye received 2 doses and the left eye received 1 dose per se. But measles was a thing that probably wouldn't come as your first diagnosis when you say a case of retinal necrosis. Your diagnosis tends to veer towards the herpes group of viruses as well as.
You were thinking of ARN also, I think, in between, you know.
Yes, sir, because the picture and the lesion showed characteristics of acute retinal retinosis in both eyes, sir.
Sure, very nice. I think you should publish it. So, yes, It's worth a publication.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good presentation. I just have one question. Like,
yes,
other eye involvement, what you had seen,
yes,
what was the frequency that you see in other publications, like similar reports?
Sir, the frequency is not mentioned because there is no particular case series, but there are only isolated case reports, sir. So generally it is seen in both the eyes. There is sequential involvement of one eye and then the second eye is involved. But certain cases have progressed on to SSP, whereas certain have stayed. Yes, sir.
Okay. Good.
Thank you, sir.
Are you not a ratified member of the AIOS?
I don't think so, sir. I joined.
Just wanted to confirm that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parth, for your contribution.
Thank you.
Since we are done with going through the list once, I'm going to call out for the participants again and we'll see if they are here to present. We have Dr. Aniket Rai. Sir, can I have you share your screen as well as unmute your mic and put your camera on?
Yes, ma'am, just 1 minute.
Sure, sir. So you'll have 4 minutes to present and 2 minutes of question and answer round.
Share your screen, Mr. Aniket.
Just 1 second. I'm facing a problem with this. Yeah. Is my slide visible?
Not yet. Oh, yeah, now. Okay.
Just, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Aniket Rai. I'm here to present.
Your camera, you are using the background. Your camera is not, the presentation is coming with your camera.
Okay, let's just stop my video then. Yeah, is it okay now?
Now it's okay.
Is it okay, sir?
Go ahead, please.
Now it's okay. Yes, it's fine.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Aniket Rai. I'd like to thank AIOS for giving me this opportunity today to present this. I'm presenting here my case on a CNVM in a young adult, which is a rare case report. So a 24-year-old female patient presented to us with complaints of blurring of vision in the right eye for the past 1 year, which was gradual and progressive to the present stage. It was painless in nature. There was no similar previous history of any eye problems in the past or any glass user surgeries. There were no other systemic abnormality. The best corrected visual acuity of the right eye was 660 and the left eye was 6x. The intraocular pressure of the right eye and left eye was 16 and 17 mm respectively. The color vision was normal. Anterior segment was unremarkable. On examination of posterior segment, the optic margins were well defined. A grayish black choroidal lesion of approximately 2 disc diameter was seen in the macular area with the central yellow area suggestive of a scar. There were multiple round yellowish choroidal lesions seen superior and inferior to the optic nerve without any signs of intraocular inflammation. This was the color fundus photo showing the posterior pole and the periphery of the right eye with the macular gray lesion with the central yellow lesion suggestive of a CNVM and the periphery showing multiple punctate yellow choroidal lesions suggestive of multifocal choroiditis. The OCT of the macula showing a subfoveal CNVM complex with distorted foveal contour and the central macular thickness of 68 microns. This is the FA photo of the same showing arterial space of posterior pole revealing hyperfluorescent lesions in the early phases, increasing in density in the later with a hyperfluorescent halo around it suggestive of a CNVM. Multiple hyperfluorescent lesions seen superior and inferior to the temporal arcades corresponding to the choroidal lesions seen in the clinical picture. There were multiple lab results which we did and which suggestive of a normal hemogram with elevated ESR, normal CRP, chest X-ray was normal, MON2 was normal, BDRL showed no positive results, IgG, IgM for torch panel were negative. HLA B27, B5, B29 were showing a negative result. She was treated with a 3-monthly intravitreal aflibercept 2 mg in 0.05 ml combined with oral steroid, following which her best corrected visual acuity was 612. OCT revealed inactive or scarring at the CNVM region, where no activity present on OCT, showing a CNVM complex with a CMTA of around 68 microns. The peripheral lesion did not show any activity, and she was maintained on a regular follow-up. So I'd like to discuss that punctate linear choroidopathy is a rare idiopathic inflammatory multifocal choroidiopathy that predominantly affects young myopic women. It is characterized by small, multiple round yellow-white punctate lesions seen in the posterior pole, rarely extending to the mid-periphery, apparently in the absence of intraocular inflammation. These lesions may evolve variably into deep, punched-out scars, where the surrounding hyperpigmentation with atrophic changes at the level of inner choroid and retinal pigment epithelium or subretinal choroidal neovascularizations. Diagnosis was based on the visualization of multiple small, between 100 to 300 micrometer round yellowish white punctate lesions seen on fundoscopy and in the absence of ocular inflammation elsewhere in the eye. Although it may be self-limiting with a favorable outcome, inflammation or neovascularization affecting the fovea may cause permanent visual loss. Thus, I like to conclude that CNVM in a young patient should be evaluated in detail for the root cause. CNVM secondary to multifocal choroiditis usually gives a good visual prognosis when diagnosed early and timely treated. Thank you.
Nice presentation, Dr. Aniket.
Thank you, sir.
My first question is, why was aflibercept chosen as the treatment of choice for CNVM?
So there was no specific predilection towards aflibercept. We decided so that it was already going towards a scarring stage, and we thought aflibercept would have a better role if we go directly with that. Even though it could we can also go along with Avastin or ranibizumab.
Yeah, and second, why can't it be birdshot?
So as shown in the fundus picture, it was not typically starting with the optatus margin, and also it was not the HLA markers were not present in that. So we were not thinking in those aspects.
All right, thank you.